In a frozen forest, an old horse is tied to a tree, alone, shaking, her breath fading into the wind. The storm is closing in, and nothing is meant to survive a night like this. Then, out of the whiteout, something appears. Small, determined. It carries a scrap of hay like it's everything. She lowers her head like she understands, and just when it feels like the end, you won't believe who comes to the rescue. The forest didn't feel like a place where anything survived. It felt like a place where things were forgotten. Wind tore through the pines in long, hollow screams, dragging snow across the ground like ash. The sky hung low and colorless, pressing everything beneath it into silence. No birds, no tracks, no sound except the storm, and something softer, struggling to exist inside it. A breath, thin, shaking, barely there. Luna stood tied to a pine tree that had likely been there longer than any memory worth keeping. The rope around her neck had frozen stiff, cutting into her skin each time she tried to shift her weight. Frost clung to her lashes. Ice gathered along the curve of her jaw. Every breath she gave, the world came back smaller. The forest stretched endlessly around her, and she stood alone inside it. Almost, out of the white blur, and something small moved. At first it looked like a trick of the storm, just another shadow bending with the wind. But then it stumbled forward, paws punching into deep snow, body low, fighting the cold with stubborn defiance. Rex, a farm dog with too much heart for a world like this, clutched in his mouth was a brittle clump of hay, half frozen, half lost to the storm. He dragged it forward like it mattered, like it could change something, like it was enough. He reached her at last, sides heaving, paws raw from ice, and pushed the hay toward her muzzle. For a moment, Luna didn't move. Then, slowly, carefully, like the world might break if she rushed, she lowered her head, accepted it, not like food, like a gift. The contrast was almost unbearable. The forest, vast and merciless. The storm, indifferent and endless. And in the center of it, a small act of loyalty that refused to die. A low sound rolled through the trees. Not wind, something deeper. Something alive. At the edge of the clearing, a shape moved between the trunks. Lean, patient, watching. A wolf. Rex froze, a thin growl building in his chest, though it sounded more like a question than a threat. Luna didn't turn her head. She didn't need to. Something older than fear told her exactly what waited out there. The storm pressed harder. Snow thickened, and, somewhere faint, broken by static, came the crackle of a voice drifting through the wind. Century storm warning. Temperatures dropping below zero after midnight. Travel not advised. Time wasn't just passing. It was closing in. Rex pressed himself closer to Luna's front legs, his body trembling, seeking what little warmth remained in hers. Luna shifted just enough to block the wind from him. The rope bit deeper. A thin line of blood darkened the gray of her coat. She didn't pull away. Not from the pain, not from the cold, not from him. Another step in the trees. The wolf moved closer, testing the edge of the clearing, calculating the distance between hunger and risk. Rex barked, sharp, defiant. Too small for what it faced. Luna answered with something heavier. Her hoof struck the frozen ground. Once. The sound cracked through the storm like a rifle shot. The wolf paused, not afraid, but thinking, measuring, the kind of silence that decides things. And then, headlights, faint at first. A distant glow bleeding through the storm, weaving between the trees like something uncertain whether it belonged here. Luna's ears twitched, her head lifted. There was something in that sound, something familiar buried under the noise of the wind and the storm and the cold. Recognition, or memory, or hope that hadn't learned how to die yet. The engine grew louder, closer. Rex turned, barking now, not at the wolf, but toward the light, as if calling it forward, demanding it see what the storm was trying to hide. the wolf slipped back into the trees. Not gone, just waiting. The headlights broke into the clearing at last, cutting through the white with harsh, unnatural brightness. A truck. Old. Tires struggling against the snow. It slowed. Stopped. For a second, nothing moved. Then the driver's door creaked open. Boots hit the ground. A figure stepped out into the storm, wrapped in a heavy coat, face shadowed beneath a hood. They stood there, staring, taking in the shape of the horse, the rope, the blood, the dog pressed against her legs. The kind of silence that comes when something wrong is too obvious to ignore. The figure took one step closer, then another. And when the wind shifted just enough, their voice carried low, rough, edged with something that wasn't just anger. It was disbelief. It was grief. It was fury held tight behind control. Who could be cruel enough? A pause. A breath that shook once before it steadied. To leave a loyal soul like you out here? Luna didn't move. She just watched. And because somewhere deep inside the cold, deeper than pain, deeper than fear, she knew something was changing. But the storm wasn't finished. The night wasn't finished. And neither was the truth about how she ended up here, because as the figure stepped closer, reaching for the rope, for the wound, for the life still barely holding on, back down the road, far beyond the trees. Another engine turned over and drove away. The rope had not always meant betrayal. Once, in another season, in another version of this life, it had meant guidance, safety, home before dark. Now it hissed through Cal Hargrove's gloves as he pulled it tighter around the pine. The knot cinched. Luna flinched. And in the brutal white silence of the storm, the sound of that rope drawing tight seemed to split time in half. Because the same hands doing this now had once brushed burrs from her mane in summer light. The same hands had once rubbed the hollow above her eye and laughed when she leaned too hard into the touch. The same voice that said nothing now had, years ago, whispered the words every good horse learns to trust. Easy, girl. Good girl. Home. Memory arrived in shards. A warm barn aisle glowing gold at sunset. A younger Luna, strong-backed and bright-eyed, stamping impatiently for grain. Cal's father, broad-shouldered and steady, standing in the doorway with a coffee cup in one hand and a grin he wore more often back then. She's got more heart than half the men in this county, he had once said, and Cal, still young enough to believe there would always be another season, another paycheck, another chance, had smiled as Luna nosed his shoulder for sugar. That was before hospital bills, before drought, before feed prices climbed like punishment, before pride hardened into the kind of silence that can ruin a man long before debt ever does. Now the storm swallowed everything except the truth. Cal pulled the knot once more, testing it. Too tight. He knew it. He left it that way anyway. Luna shifted her weight, confused, not resisting, just trying to understand why this tree had become a place she was expected to stay. Snow collected along her back. Her ears tipped toward him, still listening for the next instruction, still waiting to be told what this was. Cal didn't look at her face. That was the only way he could finish what he had started. Behind him, the truck engine idled rough and uneven, coughing smoke into the frozen dark. The passenger side door rattled in the wind. In the bed of the truck, Rex paced in anxious little circles, whining low in his throat, sensing the wrongness before any human word could name it. Cal straightened and stared into the woods instead of at the mare who had spent half her life carrying his burdens without complaint. His jaw locked. His breath came out sharp. There were men in that county who would have called him cruel. There were others who would have called him practical. But neither word touched the real thing. The real thing was shame. It had started in his kitchen months ago, not in the forest. In the cold blue light before dawn, in the silence of a house too empty to argue with. He had stood at the counter in his work coat. He drinking coffee gone bitter from sitting too long, staring at a stack of envelopes he already knew by touch. Past due, final notice, immediate response required. One from the feed supplier, one from the bank, one from the equipment lender who had stopped pretending to be polite. He remembered the smallest details because humiliation always preserves itself so well. The hum of the old refrigerator, the cracked corner of the table where his father used to sort receipts, the photograph propped beside the salt shaker, his father standing next to Luna in her prime, one hand on her neck, both of them looking like they belonged to something that would last. Cal had turned that picture face down once, then turned it back over, because even then, some part of him had wanted to be judged. The phone had rung at 6:12 a.m. He'd known who it was before he answered. "Mr. Hargrove," the lender had said, voice smooth with that rehearsed kind of sympathy that means none at all. "Hey, we still haven't received payment." Cal had stared out the frosted window toward the barn. "I know." "You also understand," the man continued, "that if this account isn't brought current by Friday, we'll begin proceedings." Proceedings, such a clean word for the slow public stripping of a life. Cal had swallowed and said the thing men like him always say when they are out of answers but not yet out of pride. "I'm working on it." But he wasn't. Not really. There was no extra hay coming, no hidden money, no miracle buyer, just an old mare whose hips had started showing under her winter coat and a farm slipping under inch by inch. Too slowly for drama, too fast for dignity. That afternoon, he had stood in Luna's stall longer than usual. She had turned at the sound of his boots, ears forward, trusting as sunrise. He had reached out almost without thinking and brushed a patch of straw from her shoulder. She leaned toward him, just a little, the way she always had. And that had nearly broken the whole plan right there, because it is one thing to tell yourself an animal is old, useless, too expensive to keep. It is another thing entirely when that animal still recognizes you as home. Cal stepped back then, as though kindness itself had become dangerous. "She won't make it through winter anyway," he muttered to the empty barn. It sounded harsher aloud than it had in his head. He tried again. "She's suffering." That sounded better, almost merciful. Then, because lies only work when repeated, he said the worst one of all. "Someone will find her." Now, in the forest, that sentence hovered around him like something rotten. Luna lowered her head and nudged at his sleeve. Just once. Not pleading, not accusing. Habit, trust, surviving even here. Cal went still. That small touch landed harder than any scream could have. For one dangerous second he saw everything at once. His father's hands on the reins, Luna pulling a wagon through spring mud, the first winter she hauled firewood after the tractor died, the night she stood steady while he buried his face in her neck because his mother had just been taken to the hospital and he had nowhere else to put the fear. Luna had never failed him. Not once. And now he was leaving her in a place no decent thing should die. Rex barked from the truck bed, sharp, urgent. Cal turned too fast, grateful for the interruption, and walked back through the snow without speaking. Each step away felt impossible. Each step was taken anyway. He climbed into the truck with hands that no longer felt like his own. For a moment he just sat there, staring through the cracked windshield as snow swept sideways through the beams. He could still stop. He knew that. He could cut the rope. Lead her back. Admit to somebody, anybody, that he was drowning. But pride is a strange disease. It will convince a man that confession is more unbearable than cruelty. Cal shifted into gear. The truck rolled forward. In the side mirror, Luna stood where he had left her, gray against white, small beneath the pines, still watching the road as if waiting for him to come to his senses. Rex started barking wildly. Cal looked back just in time to see the dog launch himself over the side of the truck bed. He hit the snow hard, tumbled once, then scrambled up and ran toward Luna with all the reckless loyalty of a creature that had never learned to count the cost. Cal's foot moved toward the brake, paused, did not press. The truck fishtailed as he accelerated onto the logging road. In the rearview mirror, dog and horse disappeared into the storm. The farther he drove, the more the road seemed to narrow. Pines leaned over it like witnesses. Snow hammered the windshield. The radio crackled through static. Emergency weather bulletin. Blizzard conditions worsening across the county. Residents advised all back roads may become impassable by midnight. Cal turned the volume down, then off. But silence offered no mercy either. Only memory. Only the image of Luna standing there. Only the raw knowledge that he had not done this because he hated her. He had done it because he was weak. And weakness, when dressed in desperation, can do damage evil never has to work for. Miles later, he pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. The truck sat ticking in the cold. Cal gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles blanched. He told himself to breathe. Told himself to turn around. Told himself there was still time. Then he saw the passenger seat. On it lay the old lead rope's spare coil, the one his father had braided years ago by hand. A working man's rope. Honest. Built to guide a horse through bad weather and bring her safely home. Cal stared at it until his eyes burned. Then he lowered his forehead to the wheel. And for the first time that night, he cried. Not loudly, not like a man seeking absolution. Quietly, like someone finally hearing the sound of his own soul giving way. But even that didn't save her. Because after a minute, maybe 2, maybe 10, he wiped his face with the heel of his glove, started the truck again, and drove on. Back in the forest, the wind sharpened. The temperature dropped. The rope around Luna's neck stiffened further, freezing into its final shape. Rex reached her at last, sides heaving, fur crusted with snow, and pressed himself against her legs as if his small body could somehow replace the one that had abandoned them both. Luna lowered her head over him, protected what she could, endured what she had to, and deep in the trees, just beyond sight, something moved with patient hunger. By the time the first wolf stepped into the clearing, yet the road behind Cal had already vanished under snow. Night did not fall gently in that forest. It arrived like a verdict. The last of the daylight drained out of the snow until everything turned the color of old bone. The pines became black pillars. The wind deepened, and Luna, still bound to the tree, stood inside the shrinking circle of what little life the storm had not yet taken. The rope had frozen harder now. Every movement punished her. Each time she tried to ease the pressure on her neck, the fibers bit deeper into the rubbed-open flesh beneath her winter coat. Blood had begun to dry in the cold, then crack again when she moved. Pain came in pulses, sharp, then dull, then sharp again. But none of it made sense to her in the way human cruelty makes sense to humans. Luna did not understand betrayal as a concept. She only understood absence. The truck had gone, and the voice that had led her for years had gone with it. And still, somewhere in the old faithful part of her, some stubborn corner that hardship had never managed to break, she waited for it to come back. Rex did not. Rex understood enough. He paced around her legs in frantic, uneven circles, barking into the dark, then stopping to listen, then barking again as if he could force the world to return what it had stolen. Snow caked between his toes. His sides fluttered with cold and panic. Twice he ran toward the trail where the truck had vanished. Twice he came back. Not because he had nowhere else to go, because she did. Luna lowered her head and breathed into his fur. It was a small thing, a tired thing, but it was still warmth. The forest answered with another sound, a low crunch somewhere beyond the tree line, not loud, not hurried, and the kind of step that belongs to something that already knows weakness when it sees it. Rex stiffened. Then came the growl again, deeper now, closer, sliding between the trunks like a blade being drawn. The first wolf emerged without ceremony. Old, lean, winter-starved. Its coat was ragged in places, silvered by frost, its eyes pale and cold with the patience of hunger that had survived many hard seasons. It did not rush. It didn't need to. It simply stood there at the edge of the clearing, studying the shape of the mare, the dog, the rope, a calculation, a question of timing, a test of what fear could do before teeth ever had to. Rex threw himself forward, barking furiously. It would have been ridiculous in another moment, this little farm dog facing down a predator built by winter itself. But the sound that came out of him was not ridiculous. It was desperate, furious, loyal in the blind, reckless way that makes courage look almost like innocence. The wolf did not even blink. Luna's ears pinned back. Something old moved through her then. Not memory, instinct. The part of her that had once carried calves away from flooding creek beds. The part that had kicked through barn doors when smoke filled the rafters one summer long ago. The part that did not need youth to recognize danger. She shifted her weight, ignoring the fire at her throat. Then she drove one hoof down into the frozen earth. The crack of it split the clearing. Rex jumped. The wolf paused. Luna struck again, harder. A violent report under the darkening sky, the sound echoing off the trees like warning fire. She lifted her head as high as the rope allowed, nostrils wide, body trembling but not retreating. She could not run, so she made herself larger with will alone. The wolf took one step back, not enough to leave, enough to rethink. The storm thickened around them. Snow spun sideways through the clearing, blurring distance, burying edges. Lay somewhere deeper in the woods came an answering sound, a second animal, then silence. Rex heard it too. He stopped barking. That frightened Luna more than the growl had, because barking meant hope. Silence meant he was listening for how many. Rex retreated beneath her chest, pressing against her front legs, his body shaking so hard it almost rattled through her bones. Luna angled herself against the wind, turning her broad side toward the trees, toward the cold, toward whatever was gathering there. The motion tore the wound at her neck wider. She flinched but held the position. If she could not escape the storm, then she would become shelter inside it. The minutes that followed did not feel like minutes. They felt like a long test of whether loyalty had weight enough to hold back death. The wolf vanished, then reappeared farther left, then vanished again. Snow gathered on Luna's back and along Rex's spine until both of them seemed to be disappearing into the same white erasure. The cold settled deeper into her joints. Her knees quivered. Once, her hind leg nearly folded. She caught herself at the last second, breath shuddering out of her in a cloud that looked too thin to belong to something still alive. Rex wriggled out from beneath her and ran toward the edge of the clearing. Luna lifted her head sharply, rope tightening. He had found something. Half buried in snow near the tracks where the truck had turned away lay a strip of braided leather, stiff with ice. Rex pawed at it, dug it free, then dragged it back in short, stubborn pulls. A halter strap, blue and red. Cal Hargrove's farm colors. Luna looked down at it without understanding what it meant, but the object carried the smell of the barn, the truck, the hands that had tied her here. It looked like a broken piece of another life. To a human eye, it would have been more than leather. It would have been proof. Rex nosed it once, then sneezed snow from his muzzle and looked back toward the trail as if willing someone, anyone, to read the message he could not speak. No one came. A second shape appeared in the woods, then a third, farther back. The wolves were no longer just curious. They were waiting for weakness to choose their moment for them. Rex barked again, but there was strain in it now. Fatigue. He was losing heat too fast. Luna knew nothing of weather reports or county warnings or how close the roads were to closing, but every living thing in that forest understood what kind of night this had become. This was not a storm to outlast by accident. This was the kind that buried fences, silenced trails, and decided by dawn what would still be breathing. Rex darted away again, this time beyond the first line of trees. Luna jerked against the rope in panic. The fibers cut deeper. Blood warmed for half a second, then chilled. Rex returned with a mouthful of dead grass and brittle roots. He dropped them at her feet, panting hard, then looked up as if apologizing for how little it was. The sight of it, this tiny, exhausted creature scavenging scraps for a horse 10 times his size, made the clearing feel unbearably sacred. Luna lowered her head, took the offering, chewed slowly, not because it helped much, because he needed it to matter. The wolves edged closer again. Rex spun, snarling. Luna slammed her hoof down a third time, and this time the effort nearly took her with it. Pain flashed through her neck, shoulder, knees. Her vision blurred for a second around the edges. She steadied herself, legs trembling violently now. The lead wolf held its ground. Its ears twitched. Its body lowered slightly, testing. Luna drew in a breath so cold it seemed to burn all the way down. Then she did the only thing left to something cornered but not yet willing to surrender. She screamed. A horse's cry is not beautiful when it comes from terror. It is raw, ancient. It carries too much animal truth to be mistaken for anything else. The sound ripped out across the clearing and through the trees, wild enough to make even the wolves hesitate. Rex stared up at her, stunned. The wolves backed off only a few steps, but enough. Enough for another minute. Enough for one more choice. Rex looked once toward the trail, then back at Luna, then toward the trail again. His breathing changed. A decision was forming. Luna watched him, and if a horse could have understood the shape of sacrifice in another creature, perhaps she understood it then. Because Rex came to her one last time, pressed his small body against her leg, held there for a heartbeat, and then he ran, not in panic, with purpose, straight into the storm. Luna lunged so hard the rope snapped her head sideways. Pain exploded at her throat. Snow sprayed beneath her hooves. She called after him, not with words, but with the low, breaking sound that mothers make when something precious is leaving and there is no way to stop it. Rex never looked back. He vanished between the trees, swallowed almost instantly by white and dark and distance. The clearing became monstrously quiet after that. No barking, no frantic movement at her feet. Only wind, only blood, only the slow, circling shapes beyond the pines. Luna stood alone again, more alone than before, because now she knew what had been keeping her alive. She turned her head toward the trail where Rex had disappeared, eyes straining against snow that gave nothing back. Frost clung to her lashes. Her body shook from cold, from pain, from exhaustion so complete it felt almost peaceful. For the first time since the truck had left, the old mare stopped waiting for Cal, and began waiting for a miracle. But in that forest, miracles did not arrive with trumpets. They arrived on bleeding paws. Or not at all. The storm did not care that Luna was old. It did not care that she had worked her whole life without complaint, that she had carried wood, hauled feed, steadied frightened children, and stood through pain that would have folded younger animals. The storm did not care that loyalty had been the shape of her life. It only cared that she was still standing, and it intended to change that. After Rex vanished into the white, the clearing seemed to grow larger around Luna, as if the world itself had stepped back to watch what happened next. Snow swirled so thick it erased distance. The pine at her side groaned in the wind. Ice crept farther down the rope. Her wound throbbed with the rhythm of her heartbeat. Then with something slower, heavier, more dangerous, the rhythm of strength running out. The wolves waited at the edge of sight, and they were no longer hiding. The first one had earned the right to stand closest. Old, scarred, cautious. Its winter coat hung in rough layers over a frame hardened by hunger. It had seen storms before. It had watched creatures weaken before. It understood patience the way some men understand greed. Luna lowered her head and listened, not with her ears, with the deep animal knowledge that survives beneath thought. She could hear the lead wolf's paws shifting over crusted snow, hear the faint exhale from flared nostrils, hear the second one moving wider to the left, a third staying back, preserving energy, waiting for certainty. They were not rushing because they did not need to. Winter had already done half their work. Luna's front legs trembled again. She locked them. The motion sent a fresh sting through the raw flesh under the rope. Blood had dried there in dark patches, then reopened each time she fought to keep her balance. And the frozen fibers had shaped themselves around her like iron. There was no give left, no mercy, only the steady message of pressure. Stop moving. Stop trying. Stop. Luna did not know the words, but she knew the command, and something in her rejected it. The lead wolf stepped closer. Rex would have barked. Rex would have thrown himself into the impossible with all the loud, foolish courage of a creature whose heart was bigger than his body. But Rex was gone. So Luna gave the answer herself. She slammed her hoof into the frozen ground. The crack split through the clearing like a gunshot. Her leg nearly buckled after. She caught herself with a violent heave of the shoulders, nostrils wide, breath sawing out in ragged clouds. Pain flashed white behind her eyes. For half a second, the forest tilted, then steadied again. The wolf stopped. Snow raced between them. Luna struck the ground again, not because it didn't hurt, because it did. As because pain offered proof that something in her was still fighting. The second wolf drifted back into the trees, not retreating, repositioning. The lead one remained, pale eyes fixed on the horse who should, by every law of winter, have been easier by now. Luna lifted her head as high as the rope allowed. She looked bigger than she was. That mattered. Predators do not only read weakness, they read hesitation. And if she had anything left to spend, she would spend it disguising the truth. The truth was that her hindquarters had begun to go numb. The truth was that cold had worked its way into the hinges of her body and was quietly unscrewing her from the inside. The truth was that when she swallowed, she tasted blood. The truth was that she was tired enough to lie down, and if she lay down, she would not rise again. The storm sharpened. A gust hit broadside, driving needles of snow into her eyes. Luna turned into it on instinct, angling her body to reduce the force. And the movement twisted the rope at her throat, and a raw sound escaped her before she could stop it. Small, involuntary, humiliated by pain. Then she heard something else. Not the wolves, not the wind. A faint metallic flutter near the buried tire tracks. Luna turned her head and saw it half hidden beneath snow. A torn strip of receipt paper trapped against a low root. One corner snapping in the gusts like a white flag no one had earned. The ink was smeared, but part of a stamp remained visible through the ice. Hargrove Feed and Supply. The smell coming off it was old hay, diesel, the truck, the world Luna had come from, reduced to a scrap and left behind with her. She stared at it for a long second. Horses do not understand paperwork. They do not know evidence from trash. But they know when something carries the scent of betrayal. The wolves moved again. The third one came close enough now for Luna to hear its claws scrape stone beneath the snow. They were triangulating, testing edges, waiting for collapse to save them effort. Luna breathed in through pain and did the only thing available to the trapped. She made a threat out of survival itself. Her ears flattened, her neck arched as far as the rope allowed. She struck the ground a third time, harder than before, and when that was not enough, she screamed. The sound ripped across the clearing raw and high and furious, older than language and cleaner than reason. It startled birds out of some far tree. It startled the wolves into stillness. It startled even the storm, for one impossible heartbeat, into seeming to listen. Then silence fell again. The kind that made every next second feel chosen. The lead wolf lowered its head, not in surrender, indecision. It took one step forward, then another. Luna's body answered before her fear did. She lunged with both front hooves. Not far. She couldn't, but far enough to hammer the ground in front of her with enough violence to explode snow upward in a burst of white. The wolf jumped back, teeth flashing, ears pinned now. Good, Luna thought. Not as a word, but as the shape of victory when victory is only measured in inches. The effort cost her. Her chest heaved. Her legs shook uncontrollably. And at last, despite every command she gave her own body, one knee dipped. Just a little. But the wolves saw it. Of course they did. The lead one changed instantly. The caution thinned. Hunger moved forward to fill its place. Luna forced herself upright, forced weight back into the failing leg, forced the world to believe she had more left than she did. Snow buried the lower half of the torn receipt. Another gust nearly took it. It spun once, caught again, and settled farther from the tracks. A human might have lost it there. A dog would not have. And somehow, in the middle of all this cold and tooth and pain, the thought of Rex came back to her, not as comfort, and exactly, but as obligation. He had left because something in him believed she was worth saving. That belief now stood in the clearing in his absence, asking her not to waste what he was spending. So Luna endured. Minute by minute, breath by breath. The wolves circled closer, then farther, then closer again, wearing trails into the snow the way fear wears grooves into the mind. Once, the second wolf darted in too near on her left. Luna swung her body and kicked. The angle was poor. The rope choked her halfway through the motion, but the hoof clipped ice close enough to send the animal scrambling back in alarm. Not a clean hit. Enough. The clearing became a battlefield fought almost entirely in restraint. How long can hunger wait? How long can pain stand? How long can old loyalty remain upright after it has been abandoned by the hands it served? The answer kept changing. A branch cracked somewhere down trail. Luna's ears shot forward. The wolves heard it too and froze. Then came another sound, small, irregular, collapsing into itself. Not a branch. Footsteps. No. Pause. A shape burst through the white at the far edge of the clearing and stumbled hard enough to slide on its chest before scrambling upright again. Rex. He looked half made of snow now, fur matted with ice, one paw leaving a faint streak behind him where the pad had split. He was breathing so hard his ribs showed with each pull, but in his mouth, miraculously, absurdly, he carried something else. Not hay this time. A strip of cloth, red plaid, torn from somewhere human. He dragged it toward Luna, dropped it, spun toward the wolves, and barked with what little voice he had left. It was one of the bravest things the night would see, and one of the saddest, because the cloth meant he had found someone or something human near enough to tear from, and still no help had come with him. Luna lowered her muzzle toward him, trembling so hard now she could barely control the motion. The scent on the cloth was smoke, wool, soap, lantern oil, a house scent, a home scent, close enough to imagine. Far enough to break your heart. The wolves hesitated at this new variable. The barking dog returned from darkness, the scent of human somewhere on him, the horse still standing when she should not have been. Hunger is bold, but it is rarely foolish. The lead wolf backed off 2 paces. Not surrender. Recalculation. Rex did not stop barking until the sound cracked apart in his throat. Then he staggered under Luna's chest again, pressing his freezing body against her forelegs. This time his shaking was different. Less frantic, more dangerous. The violent tremor of a body entering the edge of shutdown. Luna shifted to shield him from the wind. The movement nearly dropped her. She caught herself with a grunt that sounded almost human in its strain. The storm answered with a fresh blast strong enough to bend the pine above her. Snow dumped from its branches onto her back in a freezing sheet. She flinched. Rex curled tighter. The wolves disappeared once more into the moving white. And in that narrow, brutal pause between attack and collapse, between abandonment and rescue, between what Winter wanted and what loyalty refused to surrender, Luna realized something her body had known before her mind did. Rex had not come back to stay. He had come back to prove help existed. And then the little dog did something that broke whatever remained of the night's fragile mercy. He pushed away from her legs, turned toward the trail, looked back once, then bolted into the storm again. Luna lunged after him so hard the rope tore skin wide open. Pain exploded through her throat. Warm blood spilled, startling in the cold. She cried out, a rough, broken sound, all command and fear and helpless love. But Rex was already gone. This time he did not return. Not right away. Not before the next wave of snow buried his tracks. Not before the wolves began to move again. The clearing grew enormous around Luna. Empty beneath her chest now. Cold at her legs. The little scrap of red plaid lay half-covered near her hooves. The torn receipt shivered farther out by the drift. 2 clues, 2 prayers, 2 pieces of a truth no one had yet arrived to assemble. Luna swayed where she stood, then steadied, then swayed again. The lead wolf stepped back into view. And for the first time that night, Luna understood that if help was coming at all, it would have to arrive in the next few minutes. Because Winter had stopped asking her to suffer. Now it was asking her to let go. Help did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like exhaustion, finally refusing to turn back. Rex no longer felt the cold in any clean, simple way. The forest had become a blur of white breath and black trunks, of falling and rising and falling again. His paws were cut open. One shoulder had gone half numb after he clipped a buried log under the snow. The strip of red plaid he had torn free earlier was gone now, lost somewhere behind him in the dark like proof from a world that still had walls and fire and human voices. But scent remained. Smoke, soap, chicken broth, wool dried near a stove. He chased that smell the way some creatures chase light. Ahead, through the storm, a shape finally emerged. Not a barn, not a truck. A small house crouched low against the tree line, its windows glowing weak and gold through the snow. Wind worried at the porch swing. A lantern hung beside the door, swaying like a tired star. To a man, it might not have looked like much. To Rex, it looked like the last door on Earth. He tried to bark. What came out was thin and broken. So he ran the last few yards and slammed his body against the wooden steps instead. Once. Twice. Then again with all the force his failing little body could gather. Inside, a chair scraped. A pause. Then the door opened against the wind. Maria Delgado had lived alone long enough to tell the difference between ordinary nighttime sounds and the ones that mean life is standing outside asking for something. She was 68, broad-shouldered beneath her coat, silver hair braided thick down her back, hands shaped by decades of work that never once asked whether she felt ready. Widowhood had stripped the softness from her routine, but not from her heart. She kept chickens, she chopped her own wood. She trusted weather reports more than people and silence more than promises. The mountain had taught her that. And the mountain tonight had sent her a dog. For half a second she just stood in the doorway, lantern held high, snow whipping past her boots, trying to make sense of the shape collapsed against her steps. Lord above. Rex tried to rise when he saw her. Couldn't. His front paws scraped once against the wood, then slid. Maria knelt immediately, all hesitation gone. The dog was half frozen, fur packed with ice, chest fluttering too fast. His paws were bloodied. His eyes kept darting behind her, toward the trees, toward wherever he had come from. Not lost, she realized. Leading. Maria knew animals, not the polished kind from postcards. The real kind. The ones that work until they drop. The ones that hide pain. The ones that know fear but keep moving anyway because something more important than fear is still unfinished. This dog had not come for shelter. He had come for witness. "What is it?" she asked, voice low and steady in the storm. "What's still out there?" Rex let out a sound so small it barely counted as one, then turned his head back toward the forest and tried to crawl. That was enough. Maria stood, grabbed the lantern from its hook, snatched the wool coat from the peg just inside the door, and shouted into the house, though she already knew no one else was there to answer. Then she followed him. The cold hit like an insult. Wind shoved at her shoulders. Snow packed fast over her boots. The lantern's flame trembled behind glass but held. Ahead of her, Rex staggered, fell, rose again, then looked back as if checking whether this human, too, would choose herself over the things still suffering out there. Maria kept coming. The trail was nearly impossible to read. Drift lines had swallowed the ordinary logic of ground. Branches thrashed overhead. Once, as the lantern beam slid across a print that didn't belong to dog or deer, and Maria's spine went cold. Wolf. Then another, and another. "Well," she muttered through clenched teeth, "whatever's out there, we're late." Rex pushed on, weaving now, his body beginning to fail him even as his purpose held. Twice Maria had to scoop him up after he stumbled, tuck him against her side for 20 paces, then set him down when he twisted desperately to continue. He was not asking to be saved. He was asking her to keep up. Then the trees opened, and Maria saw Luna. The sight stopped her so hard the lantern shook in her hand. The mare stood tied to the pine beneath a skin of snow, gray coat turned nearly white by frost, head hanging too low, legs braced in the rigid geometry of an animal still upright only because falling would mean death. Blood streaked the fur at her neck where the rope had cut deep and frozen there. One knee quivered visibly. Her breaths were so thin they seemed to disappear before they fully left her. And even now, her body was angled against the wind, shielding the place beneath her chest. The place where the dog had been. Maria had seen cruelty before. Neglect, cowardice, the small ugly sins people commit when they start treating loyalty like an expense, but there was something about this that crossed over into blasphemy. "You held up a whole farm," she whispered, stepping forward through the snow, the words coming to her not as poetry but as accusation. "And this is what you got?" Luna lifted her head at the sound of a human voice. Not much, just enough. But in that tiny motion was a whole shattered world of obedience, confusion, and pain. Rex barked once, just once, and collapsed at the mare's front legs. The wolves melted back into the timber at the lantern light, though Maria could still feel them there, watching from the dark with the patience of hunger. "All right," she said, more to steady herself than the animals. "All right, I'm here now." It was a ridiculous thing to say in a storm this size. No one woman with a lantern and bad knees should have been enough to change anything. But sometimes enough is simply what shows up. Maria moved slowly toward Luna's neck, palms visible, voice low. The mare didn't pin her ears, didn't strike, didn't try to pull away. She just trembled. That trembling nearly undid Maria more than the wound did. Pain is one thing. Pain endured politely is another. Maria touched the frozen rope first. It was stiff as iron. Then she touched the flesh beneath it. Luna flinched so hard the movement traveled through her whole frame. "Easy, sweetheart," Maria murmured. "Easy. I know. I know." The knife came from Maria's coat pocket, an old folding blade she used for baling twine and feed sacks and all the ordinary work of ordinary winters. Tonight it felt heavier, more solemn. She sawed at the rope once, twice. The frozen fibers resisted. Behind her the forest shifted with that terrible, almost silence of predators repositioning. "Hurry," she told herself. The third pull bit through halfway. The fourth severed it. For one dangerous second Luna lurched sideways, freed too suddenly, body forgetting how to trust open space. Maria threw both hands against the mare's shoulder, not to stop her, which would have been impossible, but to give her something living to feel. Luna steadied. Maria exhaled shakily. "That's it. Don't spend it all at once." Rex dragged himself upright and pressed against Luna's front leg again as if confirming the shape of freedom before he allowed himself to believe in it. Then Maria saw something half buried near the rutted trail. A torn feed receipt, its edge snapped by wind against a root. She bent, snatched it up, and stuffed it into her pocket without reading more than the stained block letters across the top. Hargrove Feed and Supply. A few feet away, frozen into a shallow drift, lay a strip of braided halter leather in farm colors too deliberate to ignore. Not lost. Left. Maria's mouth hardened. "Oh," she said into the storm, and now there was steel in it. This wasn't an accident. But justice would have to wait for breathing. She took off her own wool scarf and wrapped it carefully around Luna's neck, patting the raw wound from the worst of the rubbing. Then she shrugged out of the heavy outer blanket she had brought from the porch bench and laid it across the mare's back. Luna closed her eyes for half a second. Warmth, not much, but enough to be remembered, had touched her again. "Come on," Maria said. "You don't get to die for someone else's shame." The walk back to the house would have been hard in daylight. In the storm, it became its own kind of rescue. Luna could move, but barely. Each step seemed to require negotiation between pain, stiffness, and a body that had almost decided to quit. Maria kept one hand on the lead rope's cut end, the other on the mare's shoulder when she could reach it. Rex stumbled ahead, then circled back, then ahead again, refusing to let either of them disappear from sight. Twice, Luna nearly folded. Twice, Maria braced herself beneath that massive shoulder and held what she could, whispering with the kind of rough tenderness that belongs only to people who have lived long enough to know words are not magic. But sometimes they help you borrow one more minute. That's it. One more step. Don't you dare quit on me now. When the house finally came into view again, its porch light small and golden against all that white, Maria had the sudden irrational urge to cry, not from fear, not even from relief, but from the terrible, ordinary beauty of shelter when something has almost died without it. The barn behind the house was modest. Old red boards, tin roof, yet a stall usually reserved for feed storage and the occasional injured hen Maria insisted on nursing back to health. Tonight, it might as well have been a cathedral. She got Luna inside first. The mare stopped in the center aisle, nostrils flaring at the smell of hay, wood, dust, old leather, warmth, real warmth. Not enough to erase the cold already inside her bones, but enough to make survival feel possible again. Rex crossed the threshold behind them and collapsed near the stall door. Maria moved fast now. Fresh straw down. Water bucket filled. A lantern hung high. Then the old propane heater dragged in from the tack corner and lit with 2 angry clicks before the blue flame took. Warmth began, slowly, to gather. Luna stood with her head low, eyes half closed, steam rising from her coat as the snow on her back started to melt. Maria filled a basin with warm water from the house, added salt, fetched clean cloths, and came back to the wound at the mare's neck. The first touch made Luna tense. The second made her shudder. By the third, something changed. She stopped bracing for harm and started allowing help. Maria cleaned the wound carefully, face hard with concentration. The rope had bitten deep. Not deep enough to kill if infection stayed away. Deep enough to tell the truth about what desperation looks like when it wants to pretend it is practicality. "You poor old girl," Maria whispered. "You poor, faithful fool." Rex finally lifted his head from the straw and let out a weak sound. Maria turned to him too, checked his paws, wrapped the worst one, rubbed his chest with an old towel until his breathing slowed. Every few seconds his eyes flicked back to Luna, still counting her breaths, still on duty. Maria saw it then fully, painfully, the shape of the bond that had kept them both alive. Not sentiment, not fantasy. Something harder, more sacred. One old mare who refused to stop shielding. One little dog who refused to stop returning. Outside, the wind struck the barn hard enough to rattle the hinges. Maria looked toward the doors, then toward the house phone mounted by the tack hooks. This was already beyond one woman and a lantern. She wiped her hands, went to the phone, and dialed the first number that made sense. Her grandson, Eli. He answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep until he heard the storm in the background and the urgency in hers. "Grandma, what happened?" Maria looked back at Luna standing wounded under lantern light, at Rex shivering in straw, at the torn receipt on the feed chest where she had placed it to dry. Her answer came flat and certain. "Somebody left a horse to die in my woods," she said, "and if you can get here with chains on your tires, you do it now." She hung up. Then she reached for the second number. Deputy Nolan Price. Because by the time Luna finally lowered her head enough to take her first real drink of warm water, this was no longer just a rescue. It was a crime. Warmth should have been enough. That was the logic of it. A stall full of clean straw. A working heater ticking blue in the corner. Water that no longer cut like glass when it touched the mouth. A wool blanket over a body that had nearly frozen standing up. Safety had a smell now. Hay, lantern oil, salt, old boards thawing under heat, and for the first few minutes inside Maria Delgado's barn, it seemed almost possible that the night had decided to release what it had tried to take. Luna stood beneath the lantern with steam lifting from her coat. Rex lay in the straw near the stall gate, half-conscious, wrapped in an old towel, his breathing shallower now but steadier than before. Maria cleaned the torn flesh at Luna's neck with hands that had known all kinds of winter-damaged split skin, fence burns, a rooster's spur, a wood axe slipping where it shouldn't, but even she winced at the raw groove the rope had left behind. It was the mark of pressure applied long after pressure should have stopped, the mark of someone forcing necessity to do the ugly work of cruelty. "You're alive," she murmured as she rinsed the cloth. "That's the first thing. We deal with the rest after." Luna's ears flicked at the sound of her voice. She did not resist. She did not pull away. She only stood there, exhausted enough to look carved from old weather, letting kindness happen to her like something unfamiliar, but deeply remembered. The phone call to Eli had gone through. The one to Deputy Nolan Price had taken longer. Storm static had chewed through half of Maria's first sentence before the line steadied. But Nolan heard enough. Horse, tied, woods, rope wound, farm receipt. He said he would come if the road remained open. If. That was the county's favorite winter word. It hovered over every promise from November through March. If the pass holds, if the plow gets there, if the truck starts, if help doesn't get trapped on the way to helping. Outside, the storm hammered the roof again. Inside, Luna lowered her head toward the bucket and drank for a long, trembling stretch, each swallow sounding almost indecently loud in the quiet barn. Maria watched her with the hard stillness of someone counting not minutes, but signs. Water. Good. Breathing easier. Good. No collapse yet. Better. Rex lifted his head weakly from the towel nest and made a sound in his throat. Luna turned instantly. The motion was small, but sharp with urgency. Maria noticed. So did the barn itself, somehow. The whole room seemed to pause around that look. Rex thumped his tail once against the straw, tried to rise, failed, and settled again with a whine so low it was almost only breath. Luna took one step toward him, then another, and the blanket slid along her back. Steam curled from her shoulders. She lowered her muzzle to his head and touched him with a care so precise it made Maria look away for a second, just to steady herself. Not to soothe him, to confirm him, to count him as present. Rex answered with the faintest lick against her muzzle, and then something changed. It was not dramatic at first. No sudden panic. No wild explosion. Just a shift in Luna's body that no one who knew animals would mistake. Her muscles tightened under the blanket. Her ears went forward. She lifted her head and stared past the stall, past the barn wall, past all visible things toward the forest. Maria saw the look and felt a drop in her chest. "No," she said softly, as if to a thought she hoped hadn't fully formed. No, you're done, sweetheart. You're safe now." Luna struck the stall floor with one hoof. Once, and the sound cracked through the warm air like a piece of the forest had followed them home. Rex flinched awake. Maria straightened. Luna pawed again, harder. Then swung her head toward the barn doors, then back toward Rex, then toward the doors once more. She wasn't agitated in the useless way frightened animals sometimes are. This had direction, intent, a plea built out of movement because movement was all she had. "You can barely stand," Maria said, though even as she said it, she knew this was not about Luna. The mare hit the boards again, loud enough to rattle dust from the beam above. Then she turned her head sharply toward the little dog lying in the straw. And Maria understood. Not all at once, in pieces, the way Rex had come alone, the strip of cloth he had carried, the way he kept looking back toward the woods even while shivering himself toward collapse, the way Luna, even now, seemed less relieved than unfinished. "There's someone else," Maria whispered, "not a person." Her eyes went to Rex. No, a more brutal truth. "There's somewhere else he went down." Luna pawed again. Outside, tires crunched in the drive. The barn door opened a moment later with a shove against the wind, and Eli came through carrying cold air and weather with him. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, 32 years old, with the kind of face winter carves clean plain, capable and harder looking than it means to be. Volunteer firefighter, search and rescue trained, the kind of man who moved quickly without making panic noisier than necessary. He took in the barn in one sweep, the mare, the blood, the old dog, Maria's expression. "Jesus," he breathed. "Close the door," Maria snapped. "Heat's more useful than prayer." He did as told. A grin almost came to his mouth at that, but the sight of Luna's neck killed it before it arrived. He set down the duffel he'd brought, blankets, first aid kit, a coil of rescue rope, hand warmers, thermos, and crossed to the stall. "What happened?" Maria pointed to the half-dried receipt on the feed chest and the strip of braided halter thawing beside it. "What happened is some coward took an old horse into my woods and tied her to a tree to let winter finish the job." Eli's jaw hardened. "And the dog?" "Brought me to her." He looked at Rex then, truly looked, and something in his face shifted from anger to respect. "Little man," he said under his breath. Rex, hearing a new voice, managed half a tail thump. Maria told it fast after that. The steps, the wolves, the rope, the way Luna had stood shielding the dog, the clue from the receipt, the cut on the neck. Eli listened without interruption, eyes moving between Luna and Rex, building the map in his head the way rescuers do. Then Luna struck the floor again. He turned. She was facing the doors now, every line in her body strained toward outside. "She's stressed," Eli said automatically. "No," Maria answered. "She's insisting." Luna swung toward Rex again, then back to the door. Eli crouched near the dog, checked his paws, his breathing, the cold stiffness in his limbs. "He's been through it, but he's alive. If she's reacting to him, maybe she thinks—" "She knows," Maria cut in. Eli didn't argue. Search work teaches you that animals sometimes know things long before humans decide to admit them. A second truck pulled in outside, slower this time, chains crunching in the drive. Deputy Nolan Price entered a minute later in snow-dusted uniform and a county-issued parka gone white at the shoulders. He was mid-40s, spare-built, with the patient face of a man who had learned that most rural disasters arrive wearing ordinary clothes. He stamped snow from his boots, glanced once at Maria, once at Eli, and then he saw Luna. His expression flattened. Not shock, something colder. Assessment. This her? This is her, Maria said. Nolan stepped closer, taking in the rope wound, the halter strip, the receipt, like the exhausted dog. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he picked up the feed receipt carefully by the clean edge and squinted at the half-smeared print. Hargrove Feed and Supply, he read. Cal Hargrove's line. Maria folded her arms. You sound surprised. I sound like a man trying not to get ahead of evidence. That horse is evidence. He looked at Luna again. This time his jaw tightened. Yeah, he said quietly. She is. He bagged the receipt in a clear evidence sleeve from his cruiser kit, then took the halter strap too. He photographed Luna's neck wound, the cut rope, the snowmelt still dripping off her blanket, Rex's bloodied paws, every image clicking into the next with the cold precision of a system finally being invited to take suffering seriously. Then the radio clipped to his shoulder hissed with static. Storm front intensifying. County roads may be closed within the hour. Nolan muted it. If I go up to Hargrove's tonight, I may not get back down. Maria gave him a look sharp enough to split wood. Then don't go up there tonight, because there's a more immediate problem. She nodded toward Luna. The mare had not calmed. If anything, the arrival of more people seemed only to sharpen her urgency. She pawed the floor once more, then shoved at the stall gate with her shoulder hard enough to make the latch jump. Eli went still. That isn't panic, he said. No, Maria said. It isn't. Rex tried to raise himself again. This time he got halfway up before his front legs buckled. He whined and turned his head toward the barn doors. The sound was enough. Luna let out a low, rough call that filled the whole stall. Nolan looked from dog to horse to door. What am I missing? Eli answered first. I think the dog didn't get lost on his way here. Maria nodded. I think he found me. Then he went back. Nolan frowned. Back where? To wherever he nearly died the second time, Eli said. The three of them stood in a hard, sudden silence while the shape of that possibility settled into place. Rex had made it to Maria's steps. Rex had led her to Luna. Then, despite being half frozen already, Rex had gone back into the storm at least once more. Why? Not confusion, not panic, purpose, because there was still unfinished danger between the tree and the house. And Luna, now safe enough to breathe, was trying to drag the human race into understanding it. She wants to go after him, Nolan said slowly. Not after him, Maria corrected, eyes on Luna. For him. That landed. Even Nolan, lawman to the bone, felt it. Eli stood up. If there's a spot out there where he went down, and wolves are working that line, waiting until morning might be the same as not going at all. Nolan looked toward the door, toward the white violence outside. Road's nearly gone. Visibility's trash. Maria's reply came fast. Yeah, then good thing the mare knows the way. All three looked at Luna. She met none of their eyes. She was staring at the doors like the wood insulted her. Eli exhaled through his nose, decision forming under pressure. This was the kind of turning point that rarely announced itself in words. A line crossed between reasonable and necessary, between caution and courage, between what the night recommended and what decency required. If we take her, he said, we rope her clean. Not around the neck, chest harness only. Gentle. She leads, we anchor. Thermal wraps for the dog when we find him. Lights, sidearms for wolves if it comes to that. We go now, or not at all. Nolan hesitated. Not because he didn't care, because consequences belonged to his job. If we do this, he said, voice low, and somebody gets hurt. Maria cut him off. Deputy, if we don't do this, somebody already did. Silence again. Then Nolan nodded once. All right. The word altered the room. Eli moved immediately. He uncoiled the rescue rope from his duffel, his gloved hands quick and precise, not the old kind of rope that bites and leaves shame in its wake. This one was broad, sturdy, made to distribute weight, to pull without cutting. Maria fetched another blanket. Nolan called in their position and the storm conditions, got half a confirmation through static, and clipped the radio back to his shoulder. Luna watched every motion. For the first time since reaching the barn, she went still, not calm, focused. Eli approached her slowly with the harness rope, voice low. "Easy, girl. We're not tying you down. We're tying ourselves to your chance." Maybe she understood none of the words. Maybe she understood the hands, because she did not fight him. He ran the rope across her chest and around her barrel, secure but kind, checking every point twice so nothing touched the wound at her neck. And the symbolism of it sat heavy in the room whether anyone said it aloud or not. One man had used rope to abandon. Another now used it to bring life back from the storm. Maria tucked the blanket tighter over Luna's back. Rex lifted his head from the straw and looked at her. Not confused now, waiting. The barn doors were opened. Wind exploded inward, killing half the warmth in a single breath. Snow swarmed the lantern light. The storm stood outside like a thing insulted that anyone had dared survive it. Luna stepped forward, then stopped at Rex. She lowered her muzzle one last time and touched the top of his head with a tenderness so careful it made Maria's throat ache. Not goodbye. Instruction. Hold on.
Then the old mare turned, and with Eli on the lead, Nolan at his shoulder, and Maria pulling on her gloves to follow as far as she could before age or snow forced her back, Luna walked out into the blizzard. Not away from safety, toward the one she had not yet finished saving.